emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus. You have accessed entry 220.HB0202, certificate number 51449. Christian Science Reading Rooms.
I know what you're trying to do, and you think I can be had, don't you?
Nobody moves that book. Nobody.
Well, I can move it.
Amen.
I can move it just as quick as you can.
No, sir. Let's everybody say nobody moves that book.
Nobody moves that book.
Say it one more time.
Nobody moves that book.
And a third time.
Nobody moves that book.
One more time.
Nobody moves that book.
No, sir. Nobody.
Let me ask you this, John. Do you like Christians?
Do I ever?
You
Some
like
of my
Christians?
best friends are Christians.
What about science? Do you like science?
I love science. Some of my best friends are science.
Like just lab coats with nothing in them walking around?
I actually do know some scientists that you could describe as lab coats with nothing in them.
Where's your soul? What about reading? Do you enjoy reading from time to time?
I do. I think I can say that I enjoy reading. I'm a reader. That used to be actually an epithet when I was in the rock and roll business.
Oh, really? If you saw somebody backstage?
We pulled up outside of a club in like San Antonio, and we were playing a show with the band Carissa's Weird. And we were sitting out, it was a hot day. We opened up the van. We were all sitting there waiting for them to arrive. And they drove into the parking lot and rolled down their window. You know, there are 6 people in that band, and they're looking at us out of the windows of their van. They rolled the window down, and somebody in the van shouted, "Readers!" Because we were all reading. And we looked
Did they
up
throw like a TV at you or something? Woo!
empty beer can. We were like, whoa, readers. Never heard that used quite that way.
Watch Gilligan's Island, losers.
Readers.
One time, I think this happened to my college roommate. He was walking down the strip in Vegas with a friend, and somebody is standing in front of the casino, and he sees him, and he says, "Hey, you look like a reader." And he hands him one of these glossy brochures for like escorts and strippers.
Yeah.
You look like a reader. Yeah. I'll peruse this.
Yeah, hey, dig into this tome.
Looking forward to it. Thanks for the rec. So you like Christians?
Yeah, I do.
You enjoy science?
I do.
You enjoy reading?
I do.
I have one other question for you. What do you think of rooms? Just in general.
Yeah, we're in one now. They serve a purpose. I'm kind of agnostic on rooms, but yeah, I guess I'm pro room.
And you're in favor of, imagine a world without rooms.
No, you're right. You're right. I like rooms.
You gotta have them.
Yeah, pro room.
I don't know. Is a world without rooms just all outdoors, or is it just undivided interior spaces?
What is a world without rooms? Yeah, I guess if you just had a house with no rooms, you wouldn't say it was a big room. You'd say it was a house. You just wouldn't.
You walk in and it's just a big empty floor, like a boat show before they set anything up.
Yeah, right. Although, even in garden design, they talk about the rooms of your garden.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So
room is a term of landscaping too?
Yeah, if you go and you kind of make a little seating area here, and then you put some photinia over here, and then this is your rhododendron. They're the little rooms.
Your rhododendra?
Your rhododendra.
I just want to make sure
that's for our friend.
I want to make sure you get the plurals right. I don't even know. I don't even think that's right. So if you enjoy all 4 of those things, boy, do I have the place for you. There is a place that combines all four of your interests. The Christian Science Reading Room, found in the center of large and medium-sized American cities for well over a century. You ever go by one of these places?
Many, many times. They've always been a feature of fascination for me in a city because you're walking along and you hustle bustle. You got your Lamonts, you got your
Frederick and Nelson's?
Yeah, your little department stores.
What if the show is all about bygone Seattle department stores now?
Sporting goods. And then you come upon a room that's like, the window is full of books and pamphlets, but they're not really for sale. Everything is sort of taupe in color. You look inside and it seems like a waiting room for something, but that's all there is.
There's no people in it.
Yeah. They've always been very curious places, but I've never really darkened their doors.
I also have never gone inside.
And it seems like something one of us would have done.
Right. Why didn't we just walk in?
Just like, hello, you got books in here. What's your story?
And I think the reason people don't go in is because there's a name of a kind of offbeat sounding religion in the title. And especially a religion that sounds a little like Scientology.
It does.
Which also owns real estate in major American cities and has visitors centers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that spooked me because I used to talk to Hare Krishnas in the airport for hours.
Sure.
And I wasn't afraid of engaging.
I'm sorry you missed all those
people.
Flights, but it was probably worth it.
You know, it was back in the day when you went to the airport and just hung around.
6 hours early, I'll have a whiskey and soda and chat up Hare Krishna.
There wasn't all that security. Yeah, I used to go, smoke weed in the stairwell and then go talk to religious people. But yeah, it was the Scientology proximity.
They must hate that because it's just an accident.
I'm sure they do. It hasn't. Yeah, right. They're not connected in any way. But also, I feel like the fact that you go in and the door closes behind you.
Oh, I see. You think something's gonna? You think it's a death trap?
Well, I don't. I
like
mean,
Indiana Jones blow darts are gonna fly out of the pamphlets on the walls, and
it just seems. It seems like I guess talking to somebody in an airport or a religious person that's standing out on the street or somebody that approaches you is a kind of receptivity, whereas going in a door indicates
I have a purpose.
Yeah, or like I'm genuinely interested in hearing your proselytization.
Sure. You don't want to give the illusion of effort or initiative.
Right. I think if there had been sandwiches, if the sign had said like hot coffee, I think I definitely would have visited.
They seem to always be staffed by maybe like nice old ladies.
Mm-hmm. So
it wouldn't surprise me if there is a bowl of Tootsie Rolls or butterscotch lifesavers that they don't make anymore, or something like that. I don't know if there's snacks.
Yeah, and I was always looking for places to read too, but I mean, I needed a coffee.
And it's not clear. Could I just come in here with my copy of
right, the varieties of religious experience and sit and read it?
Yeah, what if I'm reading like The Girl on the Train? Like, can I just sit in there with a bestseller and read?
Right.
Is it a Christian Science reading room or is it a Christian Science reading room? They need to punctuate it more
It could be a Christian Science reading room.
Exactly. For Christians who want to come in and read about science. Like if I have a copy of a Stephen Jay Gould book, but I can, talk about how I've been saved.
Sure. You come in and you're like, I'm reading Guns, Germs, and Steel or whatever.
I'm fascinated by the panda's thumb, but I also have a close relationship with my Lord and Savior. Can I sit in one of your chairs? And they'd say, sure.
Another thing, I think, if there was a wall of books that, that seemed like well-read, leather-bound books across a wide variety of topics, I would have found it more enticing, but it seemed like it was a small library.
Yeah, all the books seem like they're face out, which kind of happens in a struggling bookstore, or just a bookstore that has like 2 books and a bunch of pamphlets to show, which I think is the case.
Yeah, it's like a grocery store in Romania in the 70s where it's like, we have 11 cans of tomatoes and they put them, they arrange them in pyramids and stuff to make it look like there's
an Asian market by our house that really has that vibe where you're kind of like wondering like, which Asian society's criminal organization is this a front for, or it could be Russians. I'm not generalizing racially.
Sure.
Just culturally.
For sure, there was a store like that in Venice. I was living in Venice, California last year. There was a little store around the corner from my house that had clearly never sold anything or hadn't sold anything in years. You couldn't even find a candy bar in there. The shelves were stacked with like unopened boxes, unopened shipping boxes, but there were always 6 guys standing at the cash register doing some kind of transaction, buying lollipops, I guess.
And the place by my house, there's also no people there, so you understand why they have no groceries.
Oh, right.
That's the amount of groceries you want to have if you have no customers. You also want to have no groceries.
Well, so that brings us back to Christian Science Reading Room. Is that the number of books you want to have if no one's coming in?
I have never seen, when I peek through the window, I don't see people in there. And that's what fascinates me about them. They're in all these cities.
Yeah.
You'll walk out of your hotel in Fort Worth or Indianapolis, and you'll walk by a Christian Science Reading Room. There's a network of these things.
Yeah. And
No
it's
people.
prime real estate.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's a place where you can walk in and you get lowered into your spy organization's secret headquarters is, because what are they?
Sure. What better way to keep other spies out
Right.
than to have a little old lady in there who's like, oh, do you want to talk about Christian Science?
Just put the name of a slightly off-putting religion on your signboard, and you will never be troubled.
Yeah.
You don't even see like homeless people there, which is not a problem. Is not a
That's
issue that other libraries have
because
for sure.
they don't offer coffee. If they did, I think there'd be a lot more people in there.
Coffee.
Yeah. I know coffee isn't an enticement to you, non-coffee drinker, but for a lot of us, it would bring us in off the street.
I have my own like off-putting religious hangups here. Yeah. So hot coffee, I'd be like, no, sir.
Thank you, Den of Vice.
Get behind me, Satan.
Yeah, what would entice you? Would it be like bologna sandwiches? What would bring you in off the street? Bologna on white bread?
Bologna sandwiches? Let me just ask you one question. Does it have Miracle Whip? All right.
I'll join your religion.
It's got to be olive loaf. It's got to be the kind of the square bologna with the weird red and green flecks. That's all I will eat.
No, thanks.
Well, I have religious reasons. Yeah. We have to eat the weird red and green flecks. No, not really. The story of the Christian Science Reading Rooms dates back to the year 1866.
Oh.
When a woman named Mary Baker Eddy, she's actually not named Mary Baker Eddy at this point. She has other married names.
Mm-hmm.
She's already been married once, and she's widowed, and she's about to be divorced from her second husband. So her name is
Mary Baker
Gower
somebody.
Patterson,
Yeah.
something. And she slips on an icy sidewalk in Swampscott, Massachusetts.
This is how
home.
So many religions get started.
Can you imagine? Like the first scene of the movie is just going to be like Muhammad is like about to go into a cave, and he slips and falls on the ice.
Whoopsie-daisy. Bonk.
I guess you have to have some inciting event to kind of get you away from the workaday world into whatever mental reverie space is needed to have religious epiphany. And Buddha had his lotus tree. And Mary Baker Eddy had some guy who didn't shovel his walk.
Isaac Newton had the apple.
Right. In her case, the thing that fell was not an apple. It was her hip, I think. So she's taken home. And doctors in the later Christian Science accounts tell her that it's a very serious injury. It might be spinal. And in some accounts, she only has like 3 days to live.
Oh, I like those accounts.
This is, wow.
Well,
You're a little hard on this lady you've never met.
No, I'm saying that if you're going to found a religion.
You want stakes.
Yeah, you don't want it to be like I slipped on the ice and I bruised my elbow and then I had a revelation. No, it's like I had 3 days to live. Come on.
Yeah, in screenwriting, that's the ticking clock.
Yeah.
Like nobody ever told Buddha, hey, if you don't have a vision under this lotus tree before this hourglass runs out.
That's right. Then Ralph Fiennes is going to show up.
But Mary Baker Eddy, or whatever her name is, Mary Baker Patterson, I think, has a ticking clock here. And while she is bedridden, looking for an answer to her ills, she's reading the Bible, as people did in those days.
It was the only book there was.
Like no matter what book you open, even if it said Oliver Twist, you'd open it. Oh, it's the Bible again. Why do I keep falling for this? And as reading through the Bible, she hits upon the story in Matthew chapter 9 in which Jesus cures a man with palsy.
Right.
And it's not much of a story. I mean, the guy gets healed, don't get me wrong.
It's a great story because Jesus used to do this kind of thing all the time.
That's what I'm saying. He does this every day. A guy brings him a person on a mat who's paralyzed.
Right.
Jesus says, well, guess what? Now you're better.
Sure. He turns him into a fish or a loaf or whatever.
Turn him into a fish.
I haven't read the Bible in a while.
Jesus turns loaves into more loaves.
Right.
And fishes into more fishes. He brings abundance.
Where does he get wine?
From water.
Aha!
See?
So there is some transformation happening.
Yes. In this case, do you think this is more of a water to wine thing? Guy who can't move, suddenly a healthy man?
No, I'm not an ableist. But I do feel like Jesus was throwing this kind of thing around a lot. And those were exciting times. And I wish that we had that. Wish there was somebody doing that kind of thing now.
Well,
I would like to be relieved of some pains.
Mary Baker Eddy actually lived in a world in which that was true. She had a life of sickness. She was an invalid child from a very young age. Her family reported, all kinds of seizures and fits and fevers, food issues, like she couldn't keep anything down. So, at one point she was just eating bread and vegetables once a day in hopes of just keeping something down.
Bread and vegetables. That was my second favorite King Crimson record.
I think it's like an XTC song. And there's some thought now that these ills were maybe psychosomatic in nature. There seems to be some evidence
that's a pretty touchy topic even now. Psychosomatic illness. For
Mary Baker Eddy or in general?
In general. I mean, I think that the complaints that you are describing are even to this day fairly common and undiagnosable in many cases. Autoimmune issues and people that are, that have a sort of wide variety of ailments that they can't quite find a focused cause.
Sure.
And
I don't want to say that none of those people have some heretofore undiscovered virus,
right,
or just need the right doctor to say, hey, that's Crohn's.
But psychosomatism is kind of like I would imagine that there are people who are not accused of, but who are diagnosed as having a psychosomatic illness when they would really resist that diagnosis.
Sure. And Mary Baker Eddy probably would as well. These are kind of later biographers saying, hey, some of this kind of sounds like mental illness. And she had an unhappy childhood. She had a mean dad.
Oh, another mean dad.
Your typical stern, Midwestern, religiously strict dad.
Come on, dads.
Who was, beat the kids or whatever. And maybe this was her way of actually getting some kind of autonomy.
Oh, sure.
To be like, hey, guess what? I can't eat the meat, Dad.
So it's like a reverse Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
Yes. What's it called when you're
when you're the child?
I think it's called Hausmunchen.
Munchausen. House Munchin.
She's actually eating drywall. It's a kind of pica. She also inherited from her dad very good looks. It was often commented at the time that she was the village beauty.
Oh, I wouldn't have thought. When I think of Mary Baker Eddy, I imagine a small woman with a gray bun.
No, she looked like Jessica Rabbit. She was a buxom. She had a tight red cocktail dress, just slid all the way up.
She wasn't bad. She was just drawn that way.
That's why she fell on the ice. It's so hard to walk in those heels. No, when you see pictures of her today, it's often as an old lady looking at you dourly from the cover of one of her pamphlets.
Sure, that's what makes the religion seem serious.
That's why people don't go in the storefronts. But in fact, when you look at pictures of her when she's young, she does kind of look kind of hollow-eyed. She's like a goth girl.
I'm into that.
That's not gonna hold you off.
That's my scene.
Sure.
Dark, empty, cavernous eyes.
But because of the health problems that gave her those cavernous eyes, she spent her life kind of in search of cures. And this was an age of faddism in America, right?
I'll say patent medicines.
Right. All kinds of quackery, and some of which we still practice and have entered the realms of pseudo-quackery,
right.
Like homeopathy and allopathy, which I think is the opposite of homeopathy, but I don't get how that works. Or you would zap people with electricity, or
osteopathy,
give them vitamins, whatever John Clark Kellogg was doing at his sanitarium, shoving shredded wheat in people's veins, I guess.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm going to a chiropractor now, but also I have we've discussed my friends that are getting wheatgrass juice enemas in Arizona, even at this very moment.
And at the time, that was a thing. You would go to the country and somebody would do something weird to you, and you would hope that that was the thing. And in her case, she attached herself. The place she ended up was with a guy named Phineas Quimby.
Phineas Quimby.
If you were going to invent a name for a 19th century medical quackery faddist.
I don't suppose it's Phineas T. Quimby, is it?
Oh, I almost hope it is.
That is a great name, Phineas Quimby.
He was a mesmerist.
Was he a mouse?
He was a little mouse that dressed in a doorman's jacket for some reason. But nobody ever commented on it. No, he was kind of a gaunt, serious-looking human with a kind of the eccentric beard that you want your shaman to have.
Sure.
And he was one of these guys who would find rich ladies and tell them they needed to be hypnotized in his parlor, and it would make
I get to be one of those guys.
Make their gout or arthritis better.
I didn't know that was a kind of guy that you could be.
So she hooks herself up to this guy and immediately feels better. And this idea that, mesmerism and as Christian scientists later disavowed hypnotism. Mary Baker Eddy would often say, no, I'm not doing the Quimby thing. But this clearly shaped her thinking.
Hypnotized.
So when she fell on the ice and read in Matthew 9, she has a religious epiphany when she reads about Jesus healing this man. And as she later said in her book, I gained the scientific certainty that all causation was mind and every effect a mental phenomenon. And I don't know if that's in the text. Like, I don't know if I would read Matthew 9 and think, of course, all causation is mind.
Well, so this is also a time in American history, especially where science is also there's a proliferation of new sciences, and there is kind of it's unclear to people where science begins and ends. So you have phrenology, which is another pseudoscience, but you also have
feeling the bumps on people's skulls.
Right. But you also have, you're calling things science, maybe incorrectly, but earnestly.
Sure.
Right? You're imagining science. We were undergoing a revolution of science.
So you had all these spiritualists that would tell you what your dead relatives were
Right.
thinking, and that, your late husband Hubert is in a better place or whatever. But then you also had these people who would zap you with tiny electric shocks for your gout.
Right.
And then there was the Venn diagram of it's the same thing actually, spirit is science.
Because progress was happening so rapidly, and it all kind of seemed like magic. Now we have electric light. Now we have cross-country locomotives and telegraph across the ocean, and it was it was like such a heady time. It seemed like every time you turned around, every time you slipped on the ice, maybe you would have a new revelation that was going to connect the Bible to something true.
That's the other thing that's going on, is Americans in the 19th century are fascinated with primitive Christianity. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's related to, I don't know if it's a new country or the new technologies, but just the idea that Christianity also can be reinvented.
Right. Well, in a return to first principles, as
Right.
things get confusing in modern times, everybody wants to
Exactly.
go back to something like the text.
And maybe just reading in the Bible and reading accounts of miraculous healings and things and thinking, well, I haven't seen that in Methodism for a while, but hey, there's this guy out in the country with electrodes,
Yeah.
So you can start to see where people would connect the dots. And in Mary Baker Eddy's case, she comes to the conclusion that the universe is an illusion. One of the central tenets of Christian science to this day is that God is mind and God is infinite.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm with you.
You believe both these things?
I'm with you so far.
Well, here's the kicker after the semicolon. Hence, all is mind. So if God is infinite and he is mind, he's a mental, spiritual state or whatever, then we are within the mind of God.
Oh, so this is also like a child of Descartes and Hegel. I mean, it's like a philosophical stance. It's just that I don't think those guys applied it necessarily to the fact that their toilet room wasn't real.
Right. So yeah, it's what philosophers would call idealism. The idea that there is no, I guess Descartes would have said it's dualism. There's both mind and body.
Sure.
And Mary Baker Eddy went even further and said, no, actually there is no body. Everything is an illusion. As a result, we should be skeptical about the senses. And in particular, sickness is an illusion. All my views about my own health come from the mind of God, which is part of me and my mind. We're the same because God's infinite.
So
as I perceive it.
This isn't a Truman Show situation where all of reality is just happening in her mind. Our minds are interacting and interconnected in some way.
Yeah, we are all the mind of God, essentially.
I see.
I think. And as a result, anything that's wrong with you, a sickness, that's not something God did to you. Christian scientists did and do resist the name faith healing for the kind of healing they believe in, because to them that implies, well, first of all, it's a very specific idea of, somebody laying hands upon you and maybe then wanting a donation, and they want to get away from that idea. But also because faith healing implies that God wants you to be sick. And if you have enough faith, you can kind of plead for him to intercede and change his mind for you and get rid of the disease. And Mary Baker Eddy goes further than that and says, bro, you're not even sick.
Whoa.
Whoa. You think you're sick, but you just need to bring your mind in
blown.
harmony into the perfect mind of God through prayer. and reading my pamphlets, and then the sickness will just go away because it was never there to begin with.
So what causes a mind to become sick? What causes our individual selves to feel illness if we're all just like bounding around in the verdant fields of God's mind?
At play in the fields of the Lord?
Yeah.
Well, their treatment involves pretty much nothing but prayer. There are Christian Science practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
They release a list of all their practitioners who can do their thing, which again is starting to sound a little Scientological. But they're very clear that these people don't do nothing therapy-like. They won't lay their hands on you.
They don't hook you up to a 9-volt battery.
Right. They're not going to do Reiki. They're not going to tell you to see a doctor or not see a doctor. All they're going to do is sit with you and listen and counsel and pray with you and for you. And that's it. And maybe read the writings of Mary Baker Eddy.
So, I'm not like the world expert on Christian practice, but this is something that all Christians do, don't they? If you're sick, you would sit and pray with your sick friend? Yeah,
the practice is not unusual, but can you imagine if this was mainstream Christianity, the idea that the universe is not real and that we're all within the mind of God? Like, so she read the same stories about Jesus healing people that Christians have been reading for thousands of years, and instead has this kind of weird Eastern mystical take, like ping, nothing is real, like John Lennon dropping acid or something.
Right.
And she sees the world in a new way.
I mean, it's kind of beautiful in the idea that this woman in the late 1800s would decide that she finally had the hot take of Christianity, that all of the edifices of 2,000 years, all of these, like enormously elaborated upon stories, like she finally...
I figured it out.
She solved it, and she's like there standing on the front steps of the cathedral, like pounding on the door with her pamphlet.
Imagine the confidence, right?
It's so great.
I could never do it. Like I'd be like, well, I don't know. I have an idea, and the pastor would be like, no, actually, we're not at play in the mind of God, and I'd be like, oh yeah, never mind. No, I didn't. Yeah, you're right. No, I thought you're right, actually.
See, and I'd be home scribbling it all on yellow legal pads, grumbling under my breath, like one day they'll all be sorry. One day they'll know.
You'll be connecting pictures of people with yarn that you're eventually going to poison with arsenic or something.
But she's out there like just Jessica rabbiting her philosophy right down everybody's throat, and it's just beautiful. It's like it's that American confidence.
In 1875, she's so confident she writes a book called Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, which reinterprets the whole Bible according to this new worldview.
That's the key. She offers a new key, a new glossary.
I've got a key. Bible now with appendix. Which just is this whole worldview about, how sickness isn't real and here's how you can be healed. And that's what the real Christianity is all about.
Nothing is real. And nothing to get hung about. It is Lennon on acid.
That's right. What was in that ice in Swampscott, Massachusetts, man? Whoa. Some kind of weird fungus spores getting released. Like the same ones that caused the Salem witch hysteria, probably.
Uh-huh.
It's Massachusetts. It could be. There could be spores everywhere.
We don't use the term hysteria anymore, but yeah, go on.
That's true. I'm sorry. What's the more feminist way to say?
I don't know.
Furor.
No, mysteria. Wisteria.
Well, I mean, you add the Y to women. Do you take it out of hysteria? Like, do you spell it without the Y?
Hysteria.
Oh, we
what's
did
up?
it.
High five.
We did
Kapow.
it. We have just pushed back toxic masculinity for at least a decade. Over the next few years, she updates her science and health book 435 times. So again, you got to admire the confidence. New edition. Now with fold-out charts. It was mostly to clarify her views and to include testimonials.
Sure.
Because she was very into this idea that hundreds of people were falling into the movement. All were reporting miraculous healings.
But so she had this revelation, and then was she removed of her suffering?
She was cured. I guess I should have mentioned that she did get better. And followers started to attach themselves to her. And through publication of this book and gaining a movement, she becomes a celebrity, She becomes a big American Gilded Age celebrity. It's kind of novel because she's a woman and because she's got this whole engine behind her now. She builds a big headquarters in the Back Bay neighborhood of Boston.
Mm-hmm.
They get their own big, impressive basilica-like place. First Church of Christ, scientist.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, I'm not sure if that implies that it's Christ, like First Church of Christ the Scientist, because again, our principles are not supernatural. We're just using, it's almost like you're starting a chemical reaction or flipping a switch. If you just align your will with God, this is a scientific result of that.
Right.
Or if it's Church of Christ, but the scientist kind.
Right. I think that's what it is.
You think scientist modifies
Church, not Christ.
You don't see Christ in a lab coat saying, are your gums swollen? Try scope.
It should be noted, I think, that at this point in time in actual, what we describe as actual medicine, pre-penicillin,
Owned.
that often the treatment was worse than just leaving it alone. You could see that someone who prayed and believed that reality wasn't real might have just as a good a chance at a positive outcome as someone who said, yes, let's go into surgery, or let's take this medicine that you're offering, this, or now I'm addicted to cocaine or whatever.
Right.
Like medicine itself was still a pretty hit or miss.
I've put opium and alcohol. You'll feel better. Well, yeah, I will, because you put opium and alcohol, bud.
I feel amazing. My nose fell off, but I don't care.
Yeah, and I think now we know that the mind does have a lot of power over actual healing, you know? Like, think of all these crazy experimental results on placebos where, like, I've read that even if you tell the patient, hey, this is a placebo drug, it's just a sugar pill, see what happens, there's still measurable benefit to giving somebody a placebo and telling them it's not going to do anything.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of evidence that if you just smile, you feel better.
That's exactly right. Or there's, I think there's results now showing different kinds of placebos work better for different things. Like you give somebody a red one, and that's good for, joint pain. Whereas you got to do a green one for allergies or whatever. Like
if you give a red pill to somebody on 4chan, they're going to feel a lot differently.
Give somebody a red pill if you want a different kind of president. But no,
and I should stipulate, by the way, to those listening who actually suffer from depression, smiling does not. If somebody tells you to smile, then you should kick them in the shins.
Sure. This is the downside of all this, is it can lead to people being like, yeah, the mind's the most powerful thing, bud. Oh, you've got anxiety? Have you tried just like calming down a bit?
All you have to do is smile, bro.
Depressed? What? Go outside. It's a nice day. So yeah, like.
That makes me want to murder.
You can take that to bat. You can take that to terrible places.
Sure.
But it's true. Like Mary Baker Eddy is ahead of the game in realizing that the mind does have a ton of power over actual body immune response.
Although it doesn't seem like that's what she's realizing. It seems like she's thinking something else and just by happenstance, like stumbled onto a thing that has some clinical truth.
Sure. And we have to say that we can't use science to validate her pre-Hegelian or pre-Kantian philosophical idealism. We don't know if she's right about the world all being an illusion in the mind of God. Maybe it is.
But so she's booming. She's got her big basilica in Boston.
She's doing great. She's spreading all over. And in 1888, in addition to her big headquarters in Boston, the first Christian Science reading room opens on the second floor of the Hotel Boylston, a kind of schmancy hotel in central Boston. So above the lobby, where maybe today there's a Harry Winston or something, there's a thing called the Christian Science reading room. And this was not that weird then. Publishing houses would often have reading rooms where you could go in and peruse the merchandise.
Oh.
And this was largely because books were relatively expensive.
Oh, those were the days.
Like there were no dime store paperbacks or cheap Chinese printing presses.
No Kindles.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why a lot of households only had a Bible is because it was a big decision if you were going to get the Farmer's Almanac or the collected Shakespeare. Like you might have to pay that off over months.
Right.
There's a Christian Science publication I read that pointed out that in 1901, the cheapest version of Science and Health that they sold, which was still kind of a nice bound family thing, you want to have that on your shelf, cost $3.18. However, in 1901, that's between $80 or $90 in today's money. So just to have a nice book on your shelf might cost you almost $100.
Sure.
And this is also the factor that leads to Andrew Carnegie creating libraries in every American small town center, which was not a thing, that the town square would have a library before Andrew Carnegie said, people can't afford books.
Before he tried to assuage his guilt
right.
by being a benefactor to the country.
I've been a terrible, terrible, miserly Scottish man my whole life, he thought, swimming in his vault full of money.
To himself. He called over his 3 nephews
The Junior Woodchucks?
Huey, Dewey, and Louie.
Yeah, and
Seattle has a great number of Carnegie libraries, and I don't want to disparage the man because we got some beautiful libraries.
no, it really was a great gift. Like that guy could have invented DDT, and he might still be a net benefit to society because thousands of libraries, man. And so as a result, the Christian Scientists wanted to do this too. They also had literature they wanted to get out there. So they wanted a place where you could come in and check out their stuff. In 1899, Mary Baker Eddy decides that all their churches should have one.
Huh.
And the next year, she writes in a letter to the board of directors, and this will give you a good flavor for Mary Baker Eddy's public voice. Once more, God thunders in your ears. Get a reading room in Boston and locate it in that part of the city where people will be most apt to go into it. So in Mary Baker Eddy's mind, this is what God is thundering into your ears. Location, location, location. Like the idea that if God is thundering, he's not being like, woe unto the people of Nineveh. He's being like, get a well-located reading room. Get a nice glass storefront. Evenly painted lettering.
He really works in strange and wondrous ways.
I can't make jokes about this because we totally have it in like my Mormon tradition as well. Like if you read 19th century Mormon scripture, God will start out sounding very, he'll be like, take ye neither person's script, but go up and spread my word. But then it'll be like, to the people of Erie, Pennsylvania and Buffalo, New York. And you'll be like, whoa, like
you can't accept company script in these two towns.
Like the addition of like practical American know-how into scriptural text is something that like does not surprise Mormons.
Right.
We grew up with it.
But in Christian Science, God was very specific. At the corner of Broadway and 14th.
And he's thundering. Make an offer now. Waive inspection. So they purchase a lot of real estate all over the country. And suddenly these things are popping up. And they exist to this day, like the ones that you and I have walked by in downtown Seattle and near the university, there have been Christian Science reading rooms in those neighborhoods for over 80 years.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Well, and the Christian Science Church in downtown Seattle has now been reappropriated or donated, I guess, to the city. And it's now our town hall, which we use for big speaking engagements when a certain kind of literati come to town.
I've seen music there. I saw a great Yola Tango show there.
All right. I have performed there multiple times.
Yeah, you're no Yola Tango, but
well, it's arguable.
No, I'm sorry, I missed. That's a perfect venue for a Long Winter / John Roderick show.
If you want, you can go online and Google me playing the piano song "Commander Thinks Aloud" at Town Hall.
My wife loves shows there because you can sit in church pews.
Right, and
we are not the right age to crowd the front of a stage at a Long Winter show. Like we want to sit in a pew and watch Stephen Merritt and a lady playing the zither.
Yeah,
and that's what we do.
But that's where your book readings and your like
you'll go
humorists.
You'll go see your Dave Eggers there.
Dave Eggers, right.
You'll go see your David Sedaris. If you can get a ticket to that in Seattle.
Many times.
Good luck.
I've stood outside in the rain waiting for a miracle.
Or you're very serious, like your Anderson Coopers will be there. But yeah, and this is happening all over the country, by the way. Christian Science keeps up the nice storefronts, but in many ways, it's a religion in decline.
Right, like so many.
Right.
So many others that don't have a prosperity gospel.
In an increasingly secular age, religion is a harder sell. And I think there's a few things about Christian Science that make it especially difficult. For one thing, we no longer live in an age where praying is your best bet.
Sure, we have penicillin now.
Sure, in the 1930s, which I now say antibiotics.
Antibiotics.
Like, because Auntie B from Mayberry, from Andy Griffith's show.
Antibiotics.
Antibiotics were invented in the 30s. And, because vaccination goes back to, Jenner curing smallpox in the late 1700s. But I think what we often don't realize is that there was like a century where nobody really vaccinated anything good. Like rabies and cholera and those things didn't start until the 1890s. So right around the time when Mary Baker Eddy is getting underway and, starting all these reading rooms and churches, scientist or church, scientists.
Church.
Is it like attorneys general?
Churches, scientist.
There we go. Attorneys general. Science is also getting much better at curing disease.
Right.
And now you do not need to go to a nice old ladies' parlor.
Well, and we start to understand what bacteria really are, and then World War II really disseminates that technology widely. because now all of a sudden we're saving lives that couldn't have been saved.
Right.
Prior.
And that's a real threat to the worldview that this science and health book explains all that's wrong with you, because now there's a much more compelling and empirically successful way of curing all that's wrong with you.
But also Christian Science went through a period in my own lifetime where they were under assault from the government because a lot of kids didn't receive medical treatment. Their parents refused treatment, and then the kids died of things that could have been cured.
The Christian Science Church is very careful never to say, don't go to a doctor. But what they do say is, don't do both. Don't do us and real medicine. There's less efficacy in that.
Oh, it's not, you can't double up. Get penicillin and also pray, and you get twice as good.
You got to choose.
Twice as better?
Penicillin or a nice prayer. And
I
plenty of parents have chosen, my kid's got diabetes, let's just pray. And sad and tragic things have happened. And in many cases, states have sued, and this has gone to state Supreme Courts.
And district's attorney have prosecuted.
Yeah, it's a crazy core constitutional thing, because what are we going with? The First Amendment freedom of religion versus the duty of a parent to not kill their children.
Right.
It's a super dicey medical thing. And
ethical thing.
Ethical thing. What did I say?
Medical thing.
Yes.
It's probably not very dicey from a medical standpoint.
The doctor's like, what should I do?
To give a kid with diabetes insulin.
No, these are like no-brainers where a doctor in an afternoon could start to set the kid right. And I think that's what's infuriating for a lot of these groups that have seen, take some non-Christian scientist who sees a niece or a nephew or a friend's kid die.
Yeah.
And
die in a setting where well-meaning people are in prayer, but there's like a dialysis machine literally like right there.
Yeah,
unplugged.
Why did they put it in the room and leave it unplugged? Hard to say. Maybe it was there when they bought the house. It's like how Gandhi used to sleep with naked women to test his will against temptation.
See, I do the same thing
with dialysis machines.
I learned that from Gandhi.
How's it going? I am 487. Yeah, they put the dialysis machine there to see if they can withstand the temptation to turn it on.
Yeah, every reading room has one, a dialysis machine.
No
vials of antibiotics.
What the reading rooms do have is always a King James Bible. That was Mary Baker Eddy's preferred Bible. A copy of Science and Health.
That's the one true Bible.
And her other writings. Mm-hmm. And then back issues of the Christian Science Monitor and her other pamphlets. And maybe some microfilms and tapes and coloring books for the kiddies.
Right. Cracked magazine.
You cannot go there for secular books. I think if you went there to read a secular book, they would not kick you out because...
No, they're too polite.
The idea is this is a nice quiet vibe. It's a respite from a busy world. Come into our quiet space. Some of them function as lending libraries, I think, to this day.
Yeah.
Incidentally, speaking of the legal issue, the courts, for the most part, have found against the Christian Scientists.
Really? Is that true?
The duty to care for children actually trumps your First Amendment right to have nutty religious practice. I think because you're coming up against someone else's rights. Your minor child who maybe has a right to dialysis.
This isn't exclusive to Christian Science. Like, how does this apply to Seventh-day Adventists or other people that eschew medical intervention?
I mean, this is a pretty live issue for Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, who do not believe in blood transfusion.
Right. Adventists just believe in breakfast cereal, but is that
the only treatment you're allowed to accept?
I think so. Just more.
Yeah, you can choose your treatment, but it's either Fruity Pebbles or Cocoa Pebbles.
But yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses have fought the state in this way too, have they not?
Right, because there are many, including childhood diseases, that could easily be treated by blood transfusion. That's a non-starter for them, and it depends on the country. In Canada and the UK, they have no legal status to overturn that. In the US, there's not much case law on this. Like, this has never gone to the Supreme Court, but physicians can give treatment over parental objection.
Oh.
Like, it's not unethical procedure to give a child a treatment that the parents are saying, no, 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 no.
And none of most of the anti-vaxxers in our contemporary culture are not doing it on religious grounds.
Yeah,
they tend
secular.
to be more that they believe in a pseudoscience.
They think they have the science,
Right.
There's mercury or whatever, or you got to see this study, the autism, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
They're not appealing to a mystical view of the universe.
But this was bad publicity for Christian Science. I remember in the 70s and 80s, this being in the newspaper quite often because Christian Science was, I think, disproportionately prominent in our American culture because of the Christian Science Monitor.
That's the weird thing. They owned a daily newspaper for about a century. It did not go weekly until March 2009.
Yeah.
It was a daily paper until March 2009.
A daily paper that was widely regarded as maybe the one truly like nonpartisan or bipartisan newspaper.
Right.
It was what we think of as the Washington Post.
It was winning Pulitzers into the 1990s when it was covering like Serbian refugee plight. And it won a Pulitzer in 2002 for political cartooning. And this is the arm of a kind of, to many people, wacky seeming 19th century religious tradition. It would be like if the Watchtower suddenly of the Jehovah's Witnesses suddenly started producing hard hitting journalism about school vouchers or homelessness or something.
But it had been all along. I mean, the Christian Science Monitor was the Manchester Guardian of the United States, I guess.
And it was Mary Baker Eddy's brainchild. In 1883, of course, this is the height of yellow journalism in America, you know?
The Hearst's and the...
Hearst's New York Journal is fighting it out with Joseph Pulitzer's New York World for subscriptions. And by the way, these are not like kind of, in our day, we associate tabloid journalism with the political right. But these papers were both kind of agreed on endorsing Democratic candidates. These were both papers of like kind of the working poor because they were targeted at growing immigrant populations.
Right.
So it wasn't like crazy elderly people watching the fake news like today. It was actually like young working parents that would eat this stuff up.
But they incited all kinds of like crazy trends and violence, and in some cases, maybe the Spanish-American War. Yeah,
the stories about Hearst actually saying, you provide the photos, we'll provide the war, is probably apocryphal. But it's certainly true that, in a subscriber rush, these papers would run increasingly lurid and eye-catching headlines about any scandal of the day,
right,
including whatever the Spanish were doing in Cuba. And this led for a public appetite for a war. Like the Spanish-American War could not have happened without this subscription race.
But Mary Baker Eddy somehow aspired to be above all this this dreck.
She hated this stuff. She wrote about how the papers of today, it's the same kind of rhetoric you read in our day, futurelings, when we also have this kind of tabloid journalism. I hope you're free of this. But, she would write these kind of scolding editorials about how the papers just carry fear to many minds and, the lurid worst instincts of humanity and, above the fold. And this all crystallized in 1907 when Joseph Pulitzer's New York World actually ginned up a lawsuit against Mary Baker Eddy. They got some of her estranged relatives and friends to say that she was no longer competent and that her considerable fortune, from book sales and bequest to her church and whatnot, should be given over to her kids. Her kids were all in favor of this,
sure,
surprisingly. So she had to fight this legal battle against Joseph Pulitzer's paper saying she's a crock, she's a fraud, and her money should be given to her heirs. And she gave a series of very lucid interviews, was very persuasive in court. The suit was dismissed, but she never forgot what the papers had done to her. And the very next year, she created the Christian Science Monitor, which was going to be the nice kind of paper.
Sure.
And would not be mean to little old ladies.
And then she got her revenge in the end because she won multiple Pulitzer Prizes. And where's his newspaper now?
She won prizes named for their guy, And for years, it was an independent paper. The church has a board of directors to this day, but they would rarely, if ever, interfere in editorial content. It was a successful enterprise until the 80s and 90s and left to run on its own.
Well, I have a personal connection here.
To the Christian Science Monitor?
To the Christian Science Monitor. I knew, personally, Catherine Fanning, who was the editor-in-chief of the Christian Science Monitor in its waning days. She became the editor in the early 80s, like 1983.
How did you know Kay Fanning?
So Kay Fanning was the owner and editor of the Anchorage Daily News. She was originally married to a man named Marshall Field, who was
she was married to a to a department store.
He was a descendant of the department store.
This is what they're
family.
saying. If you change the definition of marriage, you're going to have people marrying department
Yeah,
stores.
people, you know what? Dogs and cats living together.
Kay Fanning be shopping.
But then his side of the Marshall Field family bought the Chicago Tribune as part of a consolidation. I'm sure the department store was tired of the Tribune writing editorials about their shoe selection, and they just bought the paper. And then
That's what Mary Baker Eddy should have done.
he became Marshall Field 4, I guess, became, started as a cub reporter at the Chicago Tribune that his father owned.
I just have to say, oh boy, what a scoop. I feel like every time reporters get mentioned on the podcast, I say, oh boy, what a scoop.
Oh boy, what a scoop.
So there we go.
But then he died prematurely, and Kay moved to Alaska, got a job as a cub reporter on the Anchorage Daily News.
By the way, this is another gift of yellow journalism. This kind of Lois Lane thing of all these papers having these young, comely girl reporters that would go around the world doing stunts, Nellie Bly kind of stuff. This was actually kind of a feminist result of the age of yellow journalism, and maybe helped get, the tradition that got Kay Fanning, that job.
Well, and Kay was born a Christian Scientist.
Oh.
And so she went to Alaska kind of on a spirit quest, ended up writing for the Daily News. And the Daily News was the liberal of the two papers. The Anchorage Times was the conservative paper in Alaska. And then she met a man named Larry Fanning, who was visiting Alaska, and he was the managing editor of the San Francisco Chronicle. They got married, and then together conspired to buy the Anchorage Daily News. And so when I was a kid up there in the 70s, the Fannings owned the Daily News, and they were sort of heroes of the liberal set up there and super close friends.
In cities that used to have two papers, it was always like, this is our people who's got the wrong paper on their porch.
And, my uncle was mayor of Anchorage during this period. So they would have salons at my uncle's house where all the, the literati of Anchorage were hanging around.
Some old guy that writes letters to the editor.
Well, Alaska was pretty I was about to use the word sophisticated. That would have been wrong.
Did people drive by in pickups and they were like, hey, readers?
Definitely that. Although even the conservative paper up there wasn't what you would think of. I mean, they were just like stolid Republicans that believed in the banks.
Right.
There was no, at the time, there wasn't a newspaper up there that would have been like tinfoil hat.
Sure. Like in our lifetime, there was so much less culture war, which is going to be hard for the future to
It was
believe.
just like, do you believe in this kind of bank or this kind of bank?
Nelson Rockefeller, glasses or without.
But then in 1983, I was 14 years old, 14 and 15, Kay ascended to the editorship of the Christian Science Monitor, which was to all of us in Alaska, like a huge, it just seemed like one of ours had gone to the show. She was up there with Katharine Graham as like a woman editor of a major daily newspaper in America. It was a huge deal.
And this is going to seem very odd in the future that the Christian Science Monitor was just a mainstream thing that wrote influential, if a book got a good Christian Science Monitor book review, it would be on the jacket for sure. 40% of the revenue came from actual newspaper sales, and the church supported it to the tune of 60% of its budget.
Wow.
And that actually is what led to Kay Fanning leaving the paper. Do you know this?
Yeah, because it was like some kind of, there was like it was classic, like we're cutting all the reporters or something. They were
very early. They decided in like the mid 80s, I think, to pivot to video, as we say in our day.
Boo.
Like they were like, they saw the writing on the wall. Print is not going to survive the next few decades. Ted Turner's CNN is the biggest thing.
Sure.
We want to be in broadcasting. So they sink hundreds of millions of dollars of their, Christian Science bequest into this broadcasting initiative. Kay, an old school newsprint woman, is unhappy and leaves.
Like leaves in protest. I remember it was like she made a stand.
Yeah,
right?
she was not happy. And sure enough, like this was a huge money loser. And part of the Christian Science, the Church of Christ Scientists decline today.
Churches of Christ Scientist.
Did you know some of them are like numbered? I think in the early days of the church, it would be like Well, Chicago's got the 4th Church of Christ Scientists.
Oh.
So to this day, there's some of them that are like numbered like WrestleManias.
Oh, that's cool. I'm into that.
Oh yeah, like I think all churches should be numbered like that. Like you want to know, like how Microsoft employees are always like, I was employee number 688 or whatever.
Well, they do that. You know, we have a First Methodist here. I mean, they number the first
Banks do
of
it,
their
right?
church, right? But not subsequent. Like the Methodist Church in Linwood isn't like the 42nd Methodist Church.
Because you'd feel bad.
Yeah, you would.
I mean, you live in Linwood, so you already feel bad. I used to like when we were kids and McDonald's would actually tell you how many billion hamburgers they'd sold. And it would be like,
oh, that was fun.
they'd replace the numbers. So it'd be like, oh, that was 68 billion last month. And now they've sold 71 billion.
I think at a certain point after you're over 100 billion hamburgers, you start to look at your hamburger a little more suspiciously. Like, whoa, really?
It just cheapens it.
Imagine.
There's been so many of
You just
these.
picture this fire hose of hamburgers.
That's why they changed it to billions and billions served. They don't want the imagination to wander.
I want to point out, again, trying to describe how Christian Science, how prominent it was during our time. Now it seems, certainly to futurelings, it will seem just like one of many American weird folk religions of the 19th and 20th century.
Like the Oneida cult that we've put in the omnibus before.
Right. But there have been 2 Central Intelligence Agency directors who were Christian Scientists.
Really?
William Webster and Stansfield Turner were both Christian Scientists. During the Watergate years, both H.R. Haldeman and John Ehrlichman were both Christian Scientists.
You're not really doing an ad for them at this point. Wow, two CIA chiefs and Haldeman and Ehrlichman?
Haldeman and Ehrlichman were all Christian Scientists.
To somebody our age, that's like, pass.
But also, let me just run down a list of the celebrities who were either raised Christian Scientists or Christian Scientists.
This better be good. You got to save them. You got to have some like Mickey Mouse Club kids here or something.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Marilyn Monroe.
Ooh, wait, really?
Raised a Christian Scientist.
See, Jessica Rabbit. She's got those good Mary Baker Eddy genes.
Oh, wait. Joan Crawford. Literally Jessica Rabbit.
Wow.
Carol Channing. Doris Day. My father's 1950s like archetypal like sex bomb, Doris Day.
your dad's very chaste fantasies.
He really loved her. Cecil B. DeMille.
Political conservative, by the way. When we talked about John Wayne in the last entry, we did not talk about his politics, but yeah, he loved DeMille.
Well, and that's true. Robert Duvall, also Christian Scientist.
Robert Duvall, really?
Also or raised one.
I recommend to the future his religious movie, The Apostle.
It's a great movie.
About small town religion.
Val Kilmer, Mickey Rooney, and Ginger Rogers. All Christian Scientists.
Think about how much of old Hollywood was raised Christian Scientists.
Daniel Ellsberg, which will give you an extra flip on the Nixon trip.
That's better, though. That's the other side, right?
Ellen DeGeneres.
Ellen?
Yeah. Audrey Hepburn, Elizabeth Taylor, and Robin Williams.
At this point, it's like every glamorous woman between the years of 1930 and 1965, basically.
Yeah, basically Christian Science was dunking on all other religions in terms of they were the Scientology of their day, except they weren't like, I'm not going to say anything bad about Scientology because I don't want to get the letters. I don't want to get the registered letters and the people parked across the street wearing sunglasses. But I mean, they could
have been like Ginger Rogers.
Yeah.
She's in all them. Could be Ginger Rogers jumping on a couch or whatever, tap dancing on Oprah's couch.
So anyway, it was a really a mainstream religion.
And I think it's because they came from a lot of, good Boston and Eastern Seaboard families that got on the Mary Baker Eddy bandwagon early.
Right.
A lot of these people left bequests to the church. So it kind of became a well-moneyed church. And that's probably what gets you the big basilicas, the leases on all the reading rooms, the newspaper that runs at a loss for decades. But in recent years, they've hit on hard times. I don't know if you've heard, but Mickey Rooney passed away.
The kids today aren't really like downloading his YouTube videos.
Robin Williams was the last Scientologist. It's Christian Scientist. Oh, that's terrible. Their membership peaked at about 270,000 in 1936.
Still a small denomination.
Yeah, that's not
relatively.
Maybe because there was not much of until recently, there was not much of a push into the developing world as the Catholics and the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses all did. Today, it's speculated to be under 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
Like they still put out a list of their licensed practitioners, the people you can go to get help with your
Get
healing.
prayed upon.
To get prayed for, and just get prayed upon. Wow, that's a little harsh.
Sorry.
And now it's like, it's now under 1,000 people, and you can just watch the decline. The church has lost. You can see it go down by like 5% a year or something, and now it's all concentrated around retirement centers. And as a result, the church is in financial straits. They've had to sell off a bunch of those big old buildings, like the one in Seattle is Town Hall. Big ones in Manhattan and LA are now condos. There was this is great. There's one 2 blocks from the White House, which was, I guess, built in the 70s because it was this god-awful octagonal concrete brutalist monstrosity.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be a future entry in the omnibus, brutalism.
I hope so.
And
I've got a lot to say about it.
The church wanted to tear it down and sell, because it's 2 blocks from the White House. This is prime real estate.
Yeah.
So they knew they could, keep the reading rooms lit for another few years if they can just sell this off to developers. And the city wants to make it a landmark, even though it's this ugly brutalist thing. And so they go to court claiming that their First Amendment right as a religion requires them,
to fulfill their service.
To do their religious mission, they need to tear down a religious landmark. So they're using their religious privilege to tear down their own building and sell it off for parts.
That's not uncommon. Actually, you'll see a lot of churches with declining membership who have pursued a kind of social justice or community service ministry find themselves sitting on these big temples in the centers of downtown centers of cities where their church has a capacity of 800 and they have 42 parishioners, and they want to sell the building in order to fund their food for the homeless program. And then the city ends up in conflict with the church because it's a landmark of the city. And which argument do you take? And this actually happened in Seattle around the First Methodist Church, as a matter of fact.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
One of the funniest, nobody's money problems. So the church is facing financial difficulties. And yet they keep the lights on in these reading rooms a few hours a day, staffed by volunteers. It's what Mrs. Eddy, as they say, would have wanted. One of the oddest financial squabbles they had involves the reading room, and it goes back to the failed broadcasting initiative in the 1990s that your friend Kay Fanning was against. The church was losing $80 million a year on its failed, whatever it had, a PBS show and a satellite network and whatever it was trying to build, and badly needed the money. And there was a conflict over the inheritance of a man named Bliss Knapp.
Oh, Bliss Knapp and Phineas T.
I've taken a Bliss nap before. His widow and her sister, the Maybury sisters, now control his considerable fortune of millions of dollars, which he left to the Mother Church, Church of Christ Scientists, if they would keep his book in print and authorize it as official authorized literature in all the reading rooms. This hagiography of Mary Baker Eddy that he had written, I think in the 20s or 30s, called The Destiny of the Mother Church. And the problem is this book is heretical by Christian Scientist standards because it claims that Mary Baker Eddy herself is essentially divine. She is Christ, and she is the personification of the prophecy in Revelation chapter 12 about a woman clothed with the sun who will come in the last days. And Mary Baker Eddy herself was very uncomfortable with this book and urged everyone not to buy it or believe it. But now the Christian Scientist Church has this $100 million bequest that they can only get if they make this heretical book, which says nice things about Mary Baker Eddy, puts it in all the reading rooms and says it's an authorized biography.
But that's kind of a Christ-like posture to take, to be uncomfortable with being described as the Christ.
Wait, does that mean she actually...
Well, that's what I'm saying.
The real Christ would say...
That he or she was not.
It's true that somebody like Reverend Moon, who does tell everyone, FYI, I'm Jesus, doesn't come off so well nowadays.
Right.
So it is to Mrs. Eddy's credit that she was...
It does seem like self-effacement is a quality that the Christ Savior would have.
So the Mayburys were going to give all the money to Stanford University and LACMA, the LA Art Museum, the LA County Art Museum.
Burn on Christian Science.
I don't think they picked something that would piss off the Christian Scientists.
I wonder if Stanford is going to keep their book in print.
And this went to court, and finally there was a settlement where I think the Mother Church agreed to split the $100 million with Stanford and the Art Museum. they would put the books in the
in the
the
lending
reading
library
rooms.
that's right outside the Christian Science Church. Make a little hut.
They would put it in the reading rooms, but not say that it was authorized. And I think at the same time, they commissioned a bunch of other biographies of Mary Baker Eddy from other viewpoints.
Oh,
So it's like
triple burn.
It's like the classic thing where, there's fake Where's Waldo's hidden, or like where Superman knows that somebody's going to say he's Clark Kent. So he puts out a million other copies of the Daily Planet saying that he's everybody else,
Right.
So he can hide in plain sight.
Right. Obfuscation.
So I think that's to this day, I think if you go in Christian Science reading rooms, which is a pretty big if in our case, you can still see this heretical Destiny of the Mother Church book because, hey, Mother Church got to eat.
Well, certainly, if anything survives the apocalypse, it will be Christian Science reading rooms.
I am confident that you could swim through your domed bubble cities and there will be Christian Science reading rooms staffed by some nice looking, lonely old lady kind of
lonely old, multi-tentacled, gray tentacled lady.
cleaning the countertops and straightening little pamphlets and sorting microfilm in there. So in a changing world, they are a fixed point.
Well, we should make it a goal for both the two of us and all of our listeners to patronize a Christian Science reading room in the near future.
Like patronize them to be like, oh, nice reading room.
Oh, great.
Good,
Really
good
clean.
job. Where are all the people? No, to actually drop by and say hi.
Just drop by, see if you can find the authorized biographies of Mary Baker Eddy.
I'm going to do it.
And that concludes Christian Science Reading Rooms. Entry 220.HB0202. Certificate number 51449 in the omnibus. Futurelings, in the unlikely event that anything survives the earth-scouring apocalypse that is nigh.
It's just going to be a desolate Mad Max wasteland with a nicely lit Christian Science reading room standing in the desert.
And maybe because of this entry or for reasons we cannot predict, our podcast, Omnibus, is preserved within the sanctity, the sanctum sanctorum.
Wouldn't that be great?
Of Christian Science reading rooms. Who knows? Who knows what twist of fate?
Maybe this becomes the official time capsule of the Mother Church, and
Right.
they allow it to be shelved alongside science and health.
As it morphs, as time goes on, before the apocalypse arrives, it may be determined, Ken, that you are the Christ.
As this becomes Holy Scripture. Well, now that I think about Mary Baker Eddy putting out 425 editions of her book, that's a podcast, man. She was the first podcaster.
Basically, we'll have that many entries by the end of the year.
Hey, Mary Baker, how you doing? Well, my cats are sick, but sickness is an illusion. So...
Yeah, anyway. But we hope and pray that we do survive long enough for you to engage with us, engage with our spirits, because there is no death. There is no corporeal reality.
It's all an illusion.
You're probably hearing this in your either hyper-evolved or devolved minds as we are communicating with you through space and time.
Yeah, I think social media deactivation is the same as any other kind of physical ailment. So basically, if we're sufficiently pious, we can keep a social media presence for millennia.
What sucks about Twitter is not in Twitter, it's in our minds about Twitter.
That's right.
So you can come communicate with us at Ken Jennings and at John Roderick, but also at Omnibus Project, where all of our episodes are tweeted.
We include addenda and errata that have been supplied by listeners who have somehow managed to get their feedback back to our day.
Right. You can go see my Instagram account, which is wonderful. It's super hilarious and
delightful.
Fun. A lot of pictures of food and dogs.
More pictures of food and dogs. I love that Talking Heads record.
You can email us through the mysteries of space-time at omnibusproject@howstuffworks.com. And if you are on Facebook, I encourage you to get off of it. But if you are on it still, you can visit the fan page there under Omnibus Futurelings. There are some wonderful people there. Hilarious.
Listeners, from our vantage point in your distant past, we don't know how long we're going to be here. There's your ticking clock. Mm-hmm. Man, Robert McKee.
I know. When is Liam Neeson going to come in and rescue our daughter?
Robert McKee got nothing on me. We hope and pray that this catastrophe will be averted, that may never come. But it may come soon. If Doomsday comes soon, this recording, like all of the entries in the omnibus may be our final word. But if Providence allows us to continue playing in his mind for another week, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the omnibus.